Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Welcome to the GSMC College Football Podcast, hosted by the GSMC Podcast Network. I am their host every Monday morning, afternoon, and evening, because there's only one college football show on Mondays here on the network. So I am Ethan Orfe, and we have quite a bit to talk about today. Some Big Ten stuff, along with the transfer rule, which is some exciting stuff. I'm going to talk some Miami football news, some LSU football news, as their coaching hires are starting to become more complete as the days go on. Some wacky news, I guess, from Division II, and some NCAA convention topics that revolve mostly around, paying players. So that's what the rundown is looking like for the day. So let's get right into our first topic of the day, which would have to deal with the Big Ten proposing a one-time transfer rule. So what does this mean? So the one-time transfer rule would allow players, not only in the 20 sports that already allow this rule, but in football, men's and women's basketball, ice hockey, and baseball, as those are the 5 sports that do not already have this rule in place. It would allow any athlete one time to transfer without the need to sit out a year. So all those guys who are, trying to make their mark, and maybe they've waited too long, they don't have to be essentially a senior, right? They don't have to be a graduate player, because, they might have sit out their senior year after transferring their junior year because they realize that this is just not going to be where they can make their mark, and they need to make a change. So this is a very welcomed idea, and I think most people would want it to happen. There's really no reason, for this to really be not nationwide at this point. And granted, it's still just a proposal, as the NCAA has not taken any more proposals since November on the topic of transfer rules, and they're holding conversation for now. But now it's starting to spark back up. So the NCAA was not prepared actually for this proposal to come from the Big Ten. Ohio State athletic director Gene Smith wrote to, I believe, ESPN. They said that they want to get this thing done, and that we want to force a discussion on this. And I think it's good for all parties involved. You're not losing any money. In fact, you might be losing money if, say, a big level transfer guy decides to leave and want to go make a start somewhere else, but then they have to sit out for a whole year's worth of practices and, team meetings, and just being visible in the college, media cycle. So if there's like a big athlete that wants to transfer out, that might actually hurt the NCAA. But with this rule, people can transfer only one time, so it's not as much as they please, but programs sometimes programs are harder for people once they're there. So not everybody has the right fit. Not everybody's running the scheme that somebody wants. Sometimes you're not right for the scheme, or the environment's not right for you, or you're not focused on what you need to do, and you need a better place to reside. And that doesn't mean that you don't want to play football for a year. It's just sometimes you have to make a change for you. So it's a welcome sign that from the Big Ten, which has Ohio State, Michigan, and all those guys, big Power 5 conference, to take a leap at this, to bring other sports involved, because, the less popular, or not the big three in the United States, other sports have had this rule, and I don't think there hasn't been any issues. I guess the only issue would be the idea of, you get a recruit, he signs there in a year, he's frustrated in playing time or something like that, and they're impatient, so they decide to transfer somewhere else to try and get some more playing time. But it really wasn't the fact that, they weren't talented enough. It was just scheme, or just, they weren't putting in the effort. So they got impatient and left. And then you lose, like a top 5 or a 5-star guy or a 4-star guy, because of impatience. But everybody's impatient at this point. Everybody wants instant gratification. Everybody wants to be the man as soon as they get there. We have these true freshmen come in all the time. Quarterback is just, put the freshman guy in there ever since 2012. It's a young man's game. And until you find your guy, you're going to keep putting in new guys, new freshmen. You're going to have them go up against other guys who have seniority, just because they haven't been able to prove that they are the ones that are going to lead you to a national title for 3 years, or lead you in contention. So, the transfer portal is another avenue to look and see if you can find your guy. And sometimes it's to keep the wheels from falling off. Like, you may have a guy like a Joe Burrow who is really, really good for one season and goes to the draft, and now you have to basically retool your offense, and you don't know if your recruits are going to be able to get it done yet. They might be too raw, so you got to go look at the transfer portal and see who can fulfill some roles for you, while you wait for your other younger players to develop into better players, and you can build your system around them. So it can also be used as a good placeholder for people, and help steer the ship. It's kind of like adding another pillar to your bridge, so to speak, so it does not collapse on you. But I believe it's a good start. But like all things involving the NCAA, they're very slow, and not everything gets made overnight, and they're probably just going to sit and wait on this for as long as they can, for whatever reason, because they're the NCAA and they can do that in whatever ways they can make things more difficult than it needs to be, the better in their eyes, I suppose. But, that's not really true. But at the end of the day, I don't really see why this rule is such a hot topic. Why can't, other sports are allowed to do it in the NCAA. Why can't, these other sports? So football, men's and women's basketball, ice hockey, which is interesting how they can't transfer as well, and baseball. So I'm surprised to not see collegiate soccer up there, but considering that how soccer is as a sport when it comes to moving teams and the transfer windows and all of that stuff, I'm not too surprised to see that that's not something that would be forced upon them as much as you would think. But I'm going to take another break, and we're going to come back and talk about some Ed Reed, some Miami football news, and that's all.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So Ed Reed is to be the chief of staff for the Miami Hurricanes, the big ACC school down in Florida. So, head coach Manny Diaz will have Ed Reed be an advisor in strategic planning, quality control, operations, player evaluations, and player development. So we all know Ed Reed, and if you don't, he played 11 years as a Raven. But before then, he was a Miami Hurricane who played from 1998 until 2001 as defensive back, and he ended up winning the national title his senior season and going into the draft after that, 24th overall pick to the Baltimore Ravens in 2002. And like I said, he played 11 years for the Ravens. He played, one and a half years. He split a year with, the Jets and the Houston Texans, but then he retired in 2015 and he was inducted into I believe the College Football Hall of Fame in 2018, and he was inducted into the NFL Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2019. So he's a very, very decorated individual. Of course, he was a Super Bowl champion, I believe twice. So he has 2 rings, and he's he was a talented guy, very thoughtful man, and is now going to be doing quite a lot for this team in Miami. So what does this mean for what he's going to be doing? How is this going to affect Miami? Well, I think he's going to be a very, very big recruiting piece for the remainder of his time being there. So if you think about it this way, sometimes guys bring in really, really high profile, talented players or from the past or from their coaching staff that were very influential, and they'll come out on, recruiting visits and talk to parents and meet with the athletes and the kids and the recruits that would, try and convince them to come to their school, to their program, and to help them win some football games. And you kind of have to use any means necessary in the legal sense of trying to bring these guys in. So someone like Ed Reed, who has always been very thoughtful, always been well spoken, always been able to galvanize people to be behind him, been a leader, it's going to be really interesting to see how he's used in the recruiting atmosphere. As he's obviously being involved in player evaluations and player development, and strategic planning, quality control, operations. What does that sound like to you? That sounds like he's going to be doing quite a bit of recruiting and visiting different places and, being involved in the whole idea of how do you want your program to look and play like, and what kind of system you guys are going to try and, or the vision per se, because, he's not a defensive coordinator or a quarterback or a cornerback coach or a DB coach. He's a guy that is going to see more of the operational side of how things are ran and I guess, bringing in talent. It looks like he's going to be a judgment on talent for the most part. And then seeing how players are developing. So I guess he's going to be in the front office dealing with guys with, advanced statistics and looking at, a whole bunch of different, different numbers and evaluations on different players because, it's good to have a guy who is out there on the field and who knows what it takes to be successful on both levels, multiple levels, and see if guys have it or not, because Miami hasn't been really relevant really since a few years ago when they were definitely trying to make a run for the national title with Mark Richt, and that just didn't work out for them. In the end of the day, they ended up losing a game that they weren't supposed to lose, and ever since then, Miami's kind of been in the middle of the pack as far as the NCAA top 25 is concerned. So if this is something that they feel can give them an edge, I'd like to see what happens, but it's going to take some time. Like most things, I don't believe that he'll have an immediate impact on the players or the organization. It'll probably take some time, a few years, until players that he was able to impact and bring in through recruiting is really going to show itself. So then maybe he decides that some guys aren't for the program, and he elects to move to other, or tries to, talk with the coaches and see exactly who are their guys right now. Because I think that's a conversation a lot of teams have to have in college, and it's tough because this isn't like everybody's getting paid to play this game. This is more so scholarships, walk-on guys. They want to play for opportunity to get to the next level. And, you have to make a choice whether or not some guys are there to help you win rather than guys who aren't. And everybody's after the same goal. So, it's tough to just say, though, this guy is not going to be able to really help us get to where we need to be, or he's not ready yet. And, there's guys looking to really cement themselves as draft picks. And if they can't prove that level of talent, when will they ever be? And I guess that kind of harks back to the whole idea of maybe this is why the 1-year transfer rule might be really good, because guys need opportunity to show who they can be, because at the end of the day, you can only put on for yourself. No one's gonna put on more for you than you. So if you believe that you're talented enough and that, maybe this is just not your place to be, then maybe you need to move on. And the transfer rule might be able to help you do that if it ever comes into passing. So Ed Reed, the new chief of staff for Miami, I'm excited. I hope other people are going to be excited about this whole idea of former players coming in and helping different programs. I remember a few years ago, who was it? Vince Young. He came back to Texas to help out over there, and that seemed like a nice story. And, I like seeing stuff like that. Former players coming back to their either alma maters or places where they played, and trying their best to help out programs and stuff like that. Because, they made history, they've made marks there, as well as the NFL. So sometimes even players are more beloved for their college success than their NFL success. Look at Tim Tebow. People still say that he's one of the greatest college football players we've ever seen, one of the greatest college football winners we've ever seen. But in the NFL, he just wasn't that guy. And either that could be just through his choices of not wanting to convert to other positions, or, do anything to stay on the field, a la Taysom Hill, or maybe it's more so it just didn't work out. But I'm sure if he wanted a position or something to do with Florida, the Gators, he'd have it in a heartbeat. So I would be really interested to see what exactly happens with the Ed Reed hiring and just look and see where Miami can take this. But we're going to take another break, and then we're going to come right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
So, Bo Pelini, the new defensive coordinator for the LSU Bayou Bengal football Tigers. So, 3-year, $2.3 million deal. He will be right under Ed Orgeron. Once again, another hire. Apparently, they've been looking for a new DC since the beginning of January, and they knew this was coming, so here we are. So what is this man's resume? He previously worked for LSU under Les Miles in 2005 from 2007, or from 2005 to 2007, the year they won the national title. And he left after that to become the Nebraska head coach for 7 seasons, where he had a 66-27 record, and he went to a bowl game 6 times during the tenure. And then after that, he went to Youngstown, hired as the head coach there for 5 years, and his record was 33-28, and he was an assistant coach for 4 years, or for a few years, with the Packers, 49ers, and the Patriots. So very interesting resume, kind of decorated across. He's done multiple things, and we'll just have to wait and see what he is able to do. Clearly he's been a part of some interesting defenses over the past few years. Of course, the national title defense was one of the best in college football in 2007. And then Nebraska run was pretty big time. He got into contention as far as getting that team into bowl games and winning games. And I will say this all the time about coaches. If you can consistently win, that means you belong in, the coaching ranks. And it's not his last 5 years as the Youngstown coach I don't believe that reflects who he might be as a head coach. There could be there just might have been a lot more things going on than we know as the public. So we just have to wait and see what Ed Orgeron and them can do. Ed said that he's so grateful to have a guy who has been able to coach championship level defenses under his wing, and to bring him back to LSU, and doing the whole Ed Orgeron thing about the great state of Louisiana and being more of a family oriented program as far as the environment and what they're able to bring in, who they like to bring in, and the sort of talent that he can bring out of the LSU secondary and the front seven, all those guys. So LSU is slowly retooling their coaching staff as everybody kind of went and parted ways, and Orgeron got his big payday. And, this is usually kind of the end of the road for big championship runs like that, especially when they're so abrupt. and they were not, they didn't seem like this was in the makings in the past few years. They kind of bursted on the scene, but everybody knew LSU was talented. LSU gets top recruits all the time, but, just the way they won that championship, it was just very miracle-esque in a sense. It was very storybook, Disney sports movie-esque. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a sports movie made about, Joe Burrow and the boys, but, now it's time to go back to work and get back to reality and see where this takes LSU now into next season. As you know, they're one of the teams that a lot of guys think is going to take a dip. Some say a moderate one, some say a hard one. Right now they're pre-ranked to be fourth, behind Ohio State, Clemson, and Alabama. So really no surprise there, really. So you kind of know what you get out of that sort of, mentality. It's not, I don't know if it's about more so, the talent that you have or the talent that you've lost, besides really you lost 9 underclassmen over the past year to the draft. You lost a bunch of your offensive and defensive coordinators that helped you lead to this national title. People are going to look at you differently. People are going to think, oh, can Ed do it? Was this just a fluke season? Or by fluke, I mean, this was a one-off, a one-hit wonder, and the jury's still out on Ed Orgeron's actual coaching ability. And I think it's weird to say that just because of, a lot of guys treasure the idea of a coach that's all about the X's and O's and not a leadership guy. Everybody wants the quarterback guru. Everybody wants the Sean McVay. Everybody wants those kind of guys, or the the Kingsburys, and all of those guys who really, really get connected in play calling and other situations like that. But Orgeron is not that type of guy. He's a different type of coach. He's more in line with Les Miles to me than not, in my opinion. But it's, sometimes you put more faith into your OCs and your DCs to get the job done. It makes things easier for you to really be yourself and be able to lead a group of people. So we'll just have to wait and see, but I'm excited about the hire. I think it's a good hire. Maybe head coaching was not, something that, Pelini really could make, the most of, and maybe defensive coordinating will help him, ground himself, and then he can maybe look back into the coaching ranks again, because, head coaching is what people want to do if they get into coaching, right? Not only that's where the dollars are at, but that's where the most, the memories are made, and that's where people have most, memorable thoughts on who these guys are and what their legacies are as head coaches. I mean, you'll be remembered in programs for DCs and OCs that are very, especially if you're there for a long amount of time, but everybody remembers the head coach, no matter where you played or where you coached at. Head coach has a bigger title, so I'm assuming that eventually he's going to want to get back into the head coaching ranks. But if he doesn't, LSU's not a bad place to, to retool and regroup and make a new sense of your career at. A Power 5 school, one of the best recruiting classes every year. And that defense is always looking to be one in the top 5. And I know last year was kind of a weird statistical year for the defense, but clearly the talent was still there, especially in the secondary, which LSU is known for being defensive back university. So we'll just have to see if they'll be able to keep such a title for themselves. So we're going to take another break and look into what happened at a Division II school that honestly is just, it's really just a wacky story. And I'm not really sure how to make up with it. Like, you can't make this stuff up. Like, I thought I was reading a piece from The Onion when I came across this the other day. And I was like, that'd be an interesting thing to talk about in the podcast. So we're going to do that after the break.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Okay, so this next topic, I found it pretty funny, actually, is, well, not really funny as in what was said. That was just kind of weird, but just the scenario of how this actually transpired and, just the time frame, the amount of time it took for action to be had. But first, I'm going to talk about a little story that kind of relates to interviews and, how people, you want to always be cool in interviews. So I was once interviewed for a podcast I did during my undergrad, and, it was really fun. I enjoyed the whole process of it and just, talking about podcasting because I love doing what I do. So when I was being interviewed by this guy who was taking pictures of me and stuff, and you're thinking about, what is it that you want to say? Because eventually it's going to be put into writing and put in a magazine. So I was trying to think of, oh man, how can I make podcasting sound super cool and really interesting for people to get into? Because at the time, that's what I wanted. I just wanted people to enjoy podcasts because, I find the medium to be really, really engaging and different from what is offered elsewhere in other forms of media. So like, I find it different than terrestrial talk radio. I find it different than, just television, shows and just different medium. So, I feel like it's more intimate. It's more connected with the people, your listeners, and you being involved with your listeners a little bit more. But it, you always want to say something cool to make people more interested in what you have to say, or to make you think that, you're like this all-knowing figure in whatever subject matter you are because you're getting interviewed anyway, right? So clearly you have to be somebody who's doing something really good, whatever you're doing or whatever it is. It has to be big time. So, this guy, who was the new hiree head coach. So Grant Valley State University, a Division II school. He was just hired to be the HC, the head coach. And then he had I'm sorry, not the head coach. He was, I believe the defensive coordinator. And he was just hired on and he was getting interviewed. And one of the questions was, who was the most person that you'd have a dinner with? And this guy, Morris Berger, he said that he would want to have dinner with Adolf Hitler. And this is his statement on the whole matter. This is probably not going to get a good review. This is Berger speaking. But I'm going to say Adolf Hitler. Berger replied, was obviously very sad, and he had bad motives, but the way he was able to lead was second to none. How he rallied a group and a following. I want to know how he did that. Bad intentions, of course, but you can't deny he wasn't a great leader. And then, of course, he said John F. Kennedy and Christopher Columbus were other two choices. The OC, or was the OC, he was just hired 3 days before this, I guess this conversation was had, and now in a matter of almost a week, or in 10 days, he's resigned and left, I guess, instead of being fired. Just not a good look at all. There's just so many, you couldn't say any other better leaders. I guess that was just, it was like this was like the worst hot take you could have ever given in the world, right? This is supposed to be like a home run, like a gimme, like a meatball thrown down the middle of the strike zone sort of question. There's thousands of people you could have said. And, in today's society, you couldn't say that 10 years ago. Say that now, that you think Adolf Hitler was a great leader, like, just because, he galvanized a bunch of people again, and for one cause doesn't mean that, in totality, he was a great leader. There's so many other great leaders that have done better things that you could have said. MLK, by the time this podcast comes out, we'll be in Black History Month. There's just, how can we get to this point? And, it doesn't help that Christopher Columbus is also in your list, which it's been well documented in history that, he wasn't such a great guy either. So, yeah, so Morris, this was not a good look on you, partner. And I don't believe the university thought it was a good look either, as they decided to part ways. He was suspended beforehand, and now they're deciding to part ways. And according to Berger, he decided to leave because he didn't want to make a distraction for the head coach. And at the end of the day, he just wanted to be more, I guess, how guys get when, they feel like they're a distraction to the team, so they decide to leave, but in reality, they just messed up. And they're basically saying they were going to get fired, but they rather take it this route. I don't know what's going to happen to Berger for the rest of his coaching career after this, because this is just a weird statement to make. You don't really know where this is going to take you after something like this. So he says that over the last 11 years, I have taken great pride in the responsibility and privilege of being a teacher, coach, mentor, and a valued member of the community. Berger said in the statement, I was excited and proud to be at Grand Valley, and I'm disappointed that I will not get the opportunity to help these players in 2020. However, I do not want to be a distraction to these kids, this great university, or Coach Mitchell as they begin preparations for the upcoming season. So that's really the gist of this whole story. It started off really abruptly, and in about 10 days, it ends. And it just goes to show you that, sometimes what you think is okay to say is not. And we should always strive to educate ourselves on certain topics before, we bring them out into the open. And maybe we should just remember to like better people or find inspiration from other things. There's been plenty of, books and other things like that on what kind of leader Hitler was for his men in that time. but it's always in retrospect of the idea of, he did horrible things, and it was never to praise him. And I don't think there was any sense of praising that could be made for him, in a sense. It was more just acknowledgement that he did, get a bunch of people to follow him, but that's not necessarily leadership, in my opinion. So I believe his viewpoints might have been a bit short-sighted, and his curiosity maybe misguided. But that's really all I have to say on that. I just thought it was an interesting side story of the college football off season, Division II, where you find all your interesting stories at. But we're going to take another break, and we're going to get into NCAA convention that's coming up.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
So the NCAA had their convention a few days ago, and of course, whenever that happens, there's going to be the hot topics that NCAA either has ignored throughout the most of the year or multiple years. And one of those topics, of course, is compensating student athletes with money, letting them make money, use their likeness and things like that. And of course, it's been slow build up since that whole conversation that happened in California. And they're kind of, at this point, making marginal efforts to make this apparent. So during the conference, the NCAA president, Mark Emmert, gave a speech that night where he talks about the criticism of the organization and says they're unfair to athletes. And he said it's up for the NCAA to fix it itself, but also keeping open the possibility of accepting a lifeline from Capitol Hill. But he didn't say much in regard of how to kind of remodel itself as far as the compensation for athletes for their name, image, and likeness. And he said one thing that we have to be clear about. One thing, college sports is about students playing other students. So comments like that don't really help the side of the argument to where they want to rebuild the collegiate football space, or the collegiate athlete space, I should say, and that won't help make efforts better on trying to get players fairly compensated for what they do and how much the NCAA profits off of these kids. So there are some ways that were talked about a bit on getting these players paid more or paid fairly and legally, but they've talked about a work product system where it's kind of you can teach classes, you can have a side business or writing a book. So something like that to where they can make money on the side while also playing sports in college, and they can still be fully focused on football or have a focus on football and do other things to make money. So that way it's not all in all, scholarship or nothing, right? And then we get into individual licensing. So that means endorsements and group licensing stuff. So that really includes so much more stuff. So, guys can go talk to big brands like Nike and Adidas, or They can use their likeness for certain things like the NCAA football video games, which honestly is why this topic gets more and more brought up as fans of the sport and of the video game. They long for this title to return so very much. And even players in the NFL or college football players, they speak on the wanting of, this game back in their lives and, being able to create their dynasties with different college schools and really going through the recruiting ranks and play Road to Glory and stuff like that, as I remember playing the NCAA football games very fondly as well. But that's not the only reason, but it does seem to be the one that makes the most headlines, the most traction, as it was just a staple in kind of like the college environment. There was college, whenever NCAA football, EA NCAA football came around, you knew the season was about to start. You had that game came out kind of first in the cycle, and then college football would be back, and then NFL would come back after Madden comes out, and you'd be good on football for the remainder of the year. And then you would get to your national title game, and you're like, okay, I'm going to play some more NCAA, and we haven't had that in years. So it's kind of like it's weird how the game makes you appreciate other programs, other schools, other players more than just watching them play. Because honestly, it's very difficult to watch everything and all things and everything in college football. There's just so many conferences, so many teams, so many programs that you have to keep track of. Video games, in a way, makes it, I guess, interesting to look at how guys who are assigned to scout players and look at how people evaluate certain players in different programs and what their ratings are and how people saw them. And it gave you kind of a benchmark on how you feel that team is as a whole in reality, in real life. So it helped kind of set up a benchmark for you as a college football fan. And thus you can build off of that when you do see them play every now and again, or if you see a top four in the playoffs and you've never heard of a team that's trying to come in. You go in NCAA and you mess around, look at their roster and see who these guys are and, see what their skill levels are. And then you watch tape on them on YouTube and, it's just a rabbit hole. But NCAA was so influential, the game rather, is so influential to the loving of, sports. And I find that with a lot of sports games. When you first get into, a sport and you don't know what's going on, sometimes video games are the best things to help you learn about the game. Like I remember, I knew what basketball was, I understood the basic concept of putting, the ball in the hoop and whoever has the most points scores and dunking and 3-point shots. But until, I played NBA 2K back in 2010, I didn't know much about basketball. And I was terrible at the game. It took me a while to really understand what things were. So I didn't understand why certain moves work or how guys are I didn't understand the skill level it took for basketball as much as I did until I started playing, video games, because it taught, it really does teach you a lot about the game, and it shows you different moves and different ideas, and it teaches you the history because they have historic teams, and you can go back and look at all of the statistics and the championships won from the past X amount of years. And it really, it kind of just shows you all in all about the sport that you are looking at and playing the game about. So I think those sort of things are really important. But of course, the most important thing is, getting these players compensated fairly so that these things can exist in a more fair environment for everybody involved. So if they can make that happen, that'd be a huge plus for fans of the sport of collegiate football and really the collegiate spaces everywhere, because, once it starts with football, everything else kind of falls in line. So we'll just have to wait and see what exactly will transpire with all of the conversations from the convention. And we'll just have to hope for the best in that case if you're for the NCAA to compensate athletes. If you're not, you believe that, a scholarship is enough, or that, some guys get paid under the table anyway. And, the NCAA knows this and they're okay with that, but they only if you're caught that they punish you. But you kind of want it to not have to be such a under the table, hush hush, wink wink, nudge nudge sort of thing. They make billions of dollars. You can't have under the table stuff when you're that profitable as a business. Essentially, it's supposed to be a nonprofit, and you have these guys who put their life on the line in order to to get to the next level, but there's no other real option. There's no other route to make money while also trying to prepare yourself to get the big dollars. And there's no other option that gives you the sort of this level of notoriety, public view, because you could just wait it out until you're a certain age of eligibility and go to the draft. But if no one ever has any tape on you for 3 years, you're not getting drafted. So you have to be involved in a school or a program for 3 years and such. So we'll see what happens, and hopefully these guys get compensated in a fair way. But we're going to take another break, and our final break rather, and we're going to get into our last topic of the day.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
All right, so for the last topic of the day, I wanted to kind of make a comparison of two of the bigger days in sports every year, especially for football, which are the national title game and the Super Bowl, as Super Bowl will be had a day after this podcast comes out. So we'll be finding out who will win versus the Chiefs and the 49ers, but I wanted to put up the two big dogs in football and see how I feel about them as, I guess, commodities and sporting events in general. I've never been to either one of them physically. Hopefully one day that does come, but as of now, I've only just watched them on television, so these are just purely based on those thoughts. And just like, how people host events around them, and just the idea of, making your own personal house events around sporting events. So, the national title has always felt more of I've never been involved in a national title party. Let's start there. I've always found that the national title was something that when you watched it at home, and you may cook some food for yourself or your family, and you just sit down and watch the national title game. But it's never so big. It's never been so big for me and my family to where we think about, oh, this guy's having this going on, or somebody's having an event. And it's just nearly not happening. People don't go out there like that for the national title. Sometimes you'll go to a sports bar but that's like doing any other thing. There's usually, sometimes people host, national title parties and that you have to RSVP into, but I don't find those things any more special than just, any other bigger game like bowl games and stuff like that. It just doesn't feel as big of a pressure outside of the TV environment of, them playing to win it all. And, the presentation, the coverage of the national title, is really second to none. Well, not second to none. It's second to the Super Bowl as far as presentation, but outside of that, their presentation for the national title game is, phenomenal, really. The coverage, how they do things, how they talk to players and coaches after they win, whoever wins, and the interviews, and just the 24-hour news cycle on how everything is ran is just it's so intriguing because, this isn't like, oh, can they run it back because they're going to have these players forever. This is like, are you going to the draft now, or there's just always more questions involved after the national title rather than, the NFL with the Super Bowl, just because Super Bowl, most guys, unless there's somebody really reeling over free agency or retirement or stuff like that, you win, you get to just get paid more to stay where you're at. So, how about trying to go back and win it again or stuff like that? That's generally how that stuff gets done. So, as far as my lifestyle involved around the national title compared to the Super Bowl, you're just kind of on edge all the time as far as for the week, because it's become more of a week thing, like it's Super Bowl week instead of Super Bowl day. It's media week. You get to hear all these people. They're on all these talk shows, all these podcasts. Their families are around them all week. They're in these hotels. And, you're just getting story after story after story, news packages or, report packages of the cities involved and just the fan bases that you always get to see. I'll never forget when the Saints went in 2009. Just, it was a very powerful Super Bowl just for what that city has gone through. And then each and every time they do those sort of things, I always watch because I've always found I always found interest in learning about people's fan bases and the cities and like how teams affect cities so much, because, I live in Atlanta, so I get to see how Falcons fans, are affected, or how Falcons affect the city of Atlanta, or how the Braves affect the city of Atlanta, or the Atlanta Hawks, when the Thrashers were here. You get to see it all, or should I say Atlanta United now. So, for instance, Atlanta United, they burst on the scene in their first season. They made the playoffs, but they didn't get to the promised land. The next season, they won the the title. And then they've won multiple cups and champions, cups as well. But they didn't get it this year. But I've never seen the city galvanize around a team so quickly and over like the last 3 or 4 years. And, Atlanta really, really, I guess meshed with Atlanta United as a commodity and as a sporting event, and people love going to the games and people like talking about them, and it's gotten more youth into soccer here and people really care about the product. And then you have someone like the Atlanta Hawks where they have Trae Young, and people really, really like Trae Young. And, as much as everybody says, they shouldn't have, Luka Doncic could potentially be an all-time great player, while Trae Young is probably good enough to be an all-star, which he is this year. But will he be better than that? Can he lead you to a title? And people feel like, Luka is a future MVP candidate, and Trae Young is just, probably one of those 5-time all-star guys that just doesn't make it over the hump. But Atlanta loves Trae Young. They think they're his guy. Like, he's their guy to follow and to lead whatever this team is going to be into. And then, of course, for football reasons, University of Georgia is so there's more Georgia fans than Falcons fans here, of course, but Georgia's more statewide, but people love UGA. They ride or die for UGA. And I don't know why that is, as far as, going back to the conversation about the Super Bowl and packages and stuff. I don't know why the NCAA doesn't do more with, fans in states of where the collegiate place is at, because I find that college towns and, universities, they can bring a unique perspective on how they view national titles and waiting on stuff like that. And sometimes people haven't won one ever. They haven't won some in years. They haven't been in years in contention. And there's always stories to be made on stuff like that. It's so, storylines can go beyond than just the 1 day or the 1 year, I guess, rental of who's the next big guy, who's the one to challenge Alabama, or who's the one to challenge Clemson recently, and stuff like that. So I always found that to be quite intriguing to look at. But, and then finally, I've noticed that the national title, they kind of try to squeeze in, I guess, commercials like the NFL does with the Super Bowl. But of course, Super Bowl budget for commercials are kind of otherworldly. That's the NBA does it too, where they have certain commercials that they do for the NBA, for their, NBA finals during this, 7-game series and all that. And they spread those out more through the playoffs, and the Super Bowl is just a giant bonanza of commercials and halftime shows and stuff like that. So, the NCAA really can't compare to the spectacle, but, I feel like they have a level of uniqueness that, no other sporting event really has either. So, I'd like to see them really dig into more of the fan side of stuff. That's just how I feel about it. But that's going to wrap up the podcast. Thank you for listening. Please continue to listen. Please like and review us, on any platform that you choose to listen to us. And don't forget to follow us on our social media. So that's our Facebook, our Instagram, and our Twitter. This has been Ethan Orfe for the GSMC College Football Podcast. I'll see you all next week.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.